Your surname may look completely ordinary. You may have written it thousands of times on forms, emails, school records, passports, and family documents without ever stopping to wonder what it originally meant. But hidden inside some English surnames are words and personal names whose roots reach back more than 1,000 years to England before the Norman Conquest, before French-speaking nobles transformed the country, and before the English language sounded anything like it does today. If your family carries one of the names we're about to explore, there may be an Anglo-Saxon story hiding behind it. But there is an important catch, because the truth about Anglo-Saxon surnames is more complicated and much more interesting than most people realize. Imagine England around the year 900. There is no Smith family living at number 12 Smith Street with the same hereditary surname appearing on birth certificates generation after generation. In fact, most people in Anglo-Saxon England did not possess hereditary surnames in the modern sense. A man might be distinguished by his father, his occupation, the place where he lived, or a personal characteristic, but the widespread system of fixed family surnames developed substantially later, particularly in the centuries following the Norman Conquest. So when someone claims that a modern English surname has been passed completely unchanged from an Anglo-Saxon family living in the 9th century, we should be cautious. But that does not mean Anglo-Saxon England disappeared from our surnames, far from it. Old English personal names survived. Old occupations survived. Words describing forests, hills, farms, streams, and settlements survived. And when hereditary surnames eventually became established, some were formed from this much older linguistic material. That means your surname may not itself have existed as a fixed family name in 900, while the name, word, or tradition from which it developed could be considerably older. And once you understand that distinction, some very familiar surnames begin to look completely different. Consider Goodwin. Today, Goodwin sounds unmistakably English, but behind it lies an ancient personal name. The Old English name Godwine combined elements associated with God and friend. Long before Goodwin became a hereditary surname, Godwine was being carried by powerful men in Anglo-Saxon England. The most famous example is Godwine, Earl of Wessex, one of the dominant political figures of 11th century England. His son Harold Godwinson would become King Harold II, the English king defeated by William the Conqueror at Hastings in 1066. That does not mean a modern person named Goodwin is automatically descended from Earl Godwine or King Harold. That would require a documented genealogical chain, and surname history alone cannot provide one. But the linguistic ancestry of the name reaches deep into the Old English world. And Goodwin is only the beginning. Another fascinating survivor is Harding. Harding has strong roots in early English naming traditions. Forms related to herding appear in Old English, built around a Germanic element associated with hardness, strength, or bravery. The name existed before hereditary surnames became normal, and later forms developed into a surname. Imagine what that means. The person answering to Harding today may be carrying a surname whose underlying name belongs to a linguistic world that existed before Norman England. If names like Goodwin or Harding appear anywhere in your family tree, tell us in the comments how far back you've traced them. And if you enjoy uncovering the forgotten history hidden inside ordinary family names, subscribe to Unknown Discoveries, because some of the most remarkable pieces of history aren't buried beneath castles or battlefields. They're still being carried by families today. But Anglo-Saxon influence doesn't survive only through personal names. Sometimes it survives through work. Take the surname Wright. Today, Wright is rarely used by itself in everyday speech, but it survives inside words such as shipwright and playwright. Its ancestry reaches back to Old English worda, referring to a worker, maker, or craftsman. In medieval society, skilled craftsmen could become identified by the work they performed, and occupational descriptions eventually became hereditary surnames. Wright, therefore, preserves a word with genuinely Old English linguistic ancestry. But here again, there is an important distinction. A medieval person becoming known as Wright does not mean his family had carried Wright as a fixed surname continuously since the Anglo-Saxon period. What survived was the Old English word and occupational tradition from which the later surname developed. The same caution applies to one of the most famous surnames in the English-speaking world, Smith. Smith is so common that it is easy to overlook just how ancient the word itself is. Old English had smee associated with a smith or craftsman working with metal. In communities where metalworking was essential for tools, weapons, fittings, and everyday equipment, the smith occupied an important position. As surnames became hereditary, occupational names such as Smith became extremely widespread. And because similar Germanic words existed beyond England, surname origins must always be investigated in their particular geographical and genealogical context. Still, the English word behind Smith takes us unmistakably into Old English. Now picture a settlement in early England. Beyond the houses is woodland. A path climbs toward higher ground. Another track leads to a river crossing. Someone lives beside the wood. Another family is associated with a hill. Someone else lives near a ford. Those ordinary features of the landscape would eventually leave fingerprints across. English surnames. Wood is an obvious example. The modern word descends from Old English wadu. Later, someone living near or associated with woodland could acquire a descriptive name that ultimately became hereditary. Hill has similarly ancient English linguistic ancestry, although individual surname histories can be more complicated than a single neat explanation. And then there is ford. Before bridges became widespread, a ford, a shallow place where people, animals, or carts could cross water, could be enormously important. Old English ford survives almost unchanged in modern English and appears throughout English place names. As surnames developed from locations and topographical descriptions, ford became another name capable of preserving a very old piece of the English landscape. Think about how extraordinary that is. 1,000 years ago, landscapes helped people describe where they lived. Centuries later, those descriptions could become family names. And today, descendants may carry those names across Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and far beyond, long after the original wood, hill, or river crossing has vanished from family memory. But some of the strongest clues become visible when you stop looking at occupations and landscapes altogether and examine the ancient personal names that survived the greatest political earthquake in medieval English history, the Norman Conquest. Because after 1066, England's naming culture was about to change dramatically. William's victory brought a new ruling elite and helped popularize continental names such as William, Robert, Richard, and Henry. Many Old English personal names declined sharply over subsequent generations. But they did not all disappear. Some survived. Some changed their spelling. Some became embedded in place names. And some eventually resurfaced as hereditary surnames. Which means that when we reach the next group of names, we begin finding something particularly intriguing, traces of Anglo-Saxon personal identity that survived even after Anglo-Saxon political rule itself had been destroyed. The first place to begin is not with a DNA test. It is with the oldest person in your family tree whose identity you can actually prove. Find the earliest documented ancestor carrying your surname. Then ask 3 questions. Where were they born? Where did they live? And how was the surname spelled in the earliest surviving records? Those details matter because the same modern surname can develop independently in different places. 2 families called Wood, Smith, Harding, or Ford may share a surname without sharing a recent common ancestor. One branch might have deep roots in Yorkshire, another in Kent, another in the Midlands, and their surname histories may not be identical. This is why geography can be more revealing than the name alone. Suppose your surname is Ford. Discovering that Ford is an Old English word is interesting. But discovering that your documented Ford ancestors remain concentrated around one small English district for several centuries gives you something much more useful to investigate. Now you can examine parish registers, wills, manorial documents, tax records, property records, medieval surname distributions, and, where surviving evidence allows it, earlier forms of the local place names associated with the family. The spelling can be especially important. Before modern spelling became standardized, clerks wrote names in different ways. A surname might appear in several forms across generations. Sometimes those variations preserve clues that have disappeared from the modern spelling. So if you're researching a surname, don't automatically reject a record because one letter has changed. Your ancestors were not filling out computerized forms. Names passed through different dialects, scribes, and languages. A Latin-speaking clerk, a Norman French administrator, and an English parish priest might not record the same spoken name in exactly the same way. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than a list of surnames. Because the English language itself carries the scars of conquest. After 1066, the ruling elite increasingly used Norman French. Latin remained important in administration and the church. Old English continued among much of the population, gradually changing as generations passed. Eventually, these linguistic worlds collided. English absorbed enormous numbers of French words. Pronunciations changed, grammar changed, names changed, but English survived. And some of the surnames we've explored are tiny monuments to that survival. Think, again, about Wright. An ancient English word for a maker survived long enough to become a surname. Think about Smith. A word connected with skilled craft survived conquest, social transformation, and centuries of linguistic change. Think about Wood, Hill, and Ford. The landscape kept its old vocabulary. Think about Goodwin and Harding. Old personal name traditions left descendants in later naming culture even after many other Anglo-Saxon names had faded. And this is why asking, "Is my surname Anglo-Saxon?" requires a more interesting answer than yes or no. Your surname may have been established in the 13th or 14th century, while the word inside it could have been spoken hundreds of years earlier. In other cases, the surname might derive from an Old English personal name that survived into later medieval society. And in others, a surname that looks Anglo-Saxon may actually have a Norman, Norse, Scottish, Welsh, or completely different origin in your particular family. The surname is the clue. The records are the evidence. There is another complication. The Anglo-Saxons themselves were not one perfectly uniform population. The traditional story begins after Roman rule in Britain weakened during the 5th century, when groups conventionally described as Angles, Saxons, and Jutes migrated from regions across the North Sea into Britain. Over generations, new kingdoms emerged: Kent, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia, and others. But early medieval Britain was never frozen in time. People moved, kingdoms fought, borders shifted. Christianity spread, Scandinavian armies arrived. Viking settlement transformed large areas, particularly across northern and eastern England. Then came 1066, so even before Norman rule, the population and naming culture of England had already experienced centuries of change. This is why you should be cautious when a website promises to tell you that one surname makes you 100% Anglo-Saxon. History does not work that neatly, and neither does ancestry. A surname follows only a narrow line through an enormous family tree. Go back 10 generations and you potentially have hundreds of ancestral positions. Go further, and that number expands dramatically. Although pedigree collapse means the same historical individuals can occupy multiple positions in your ancestry. Your surname may follow one paternal line, depending on the naming tradition involved. Your ancestry is everything around it. So even if you successfully trace one surname line to medieval England, that does not mean the rest of your ancestry shares the same origin, and DNA introduces another layer entirely. A modern DNA test cannot normally look at the word Goodwin or Wright and announce that you descend from a particular Anglo-Saxon family. Population genetics can investigate patterns of ancestry across regions and historical populations. Y chromosome research can sometimes be useful for studying particular paternal lines. But connecting a living person securely to a named individual from Anglo-Saxon England is an entirely different level of claim. For most families, documentary genealogy remains essential. That may sound less dramatic than being told a surname proves you descend from an Anglo-Saxon warrior. But the real investigation is better. Because instead of receiving a legend, You get the opportunity to discover a story. Perhaps you find a 19th century ancestor in a census that leads to a baptism. The baptism leads to an earlier marriage, then a will, then another parish. Generation by generation, the surname moves backwards. At some point the spelling changes. Then perhaps the family appears in records connected with the same county for hundreds of years. Suddenly, the surname is no longer just a word. It has locations, occupations, marriages, deaths, migrations, real people. And that is when history becomes personal. Imagine reaching a document written centuries ago and seeing a recognizable version of your surname. The handwriting is unfamiliar. The world that produced the document has vanished, but there it is. A name that eventually reached you. Not proof that you descend from King Harold. Not proof that an Anglo-Saxon warrior carried exactly the same hereditary surname. Something more defensible and, in its own way, more meaningful. Evidence that generations of people carried the line forward. So, let's return to some of the names we've uncovered. Goodwin, Harding, Wright, Smith, Wood, Hill, Ford. Names and surname forms connected with older personal names such as Edward and Alfred. Topographical surnames built from Old English landscape vocabulary. Occupational surnames preserving words whose linguistic ancestry predates the Norman Conquest. Not every person carrying these names shares one origin. Not every branch is Anglo-Saxon. And not every surname on an online ancient English list deserves to be there. But taken together, these names reveal something extraordinary. The Norman Conquest changed England forever. It removed the old ruling elite from much of its power. It transformed landholding. It brought new names, new vocabulary, and new political structures. But 1066 did not erase everything that came before it. Old English survived. It evolved. Its words remained embedded in fields, villages, occupations, personal names, and places. Eventually, some of those words became surnames, and those surnames traveled across England, across the Atlantic, to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and into families scattered around the world. A person in Boston, Toronto, Sydney, or Auckland today may carry an English surname without having any idea that the word buried inside it was already old when medieval surnames began becoming hereditary. That is the real mystery of Anglo-Saxon surnames. They are not necessarily surnames frozen unchanged for 1,000 years. They are echoes, fragments of language, pieces of landscape, memories of occupations, survivors of personal names, small traces of an England that officially disappeared as a political world after 1066, but never completely vanished from the culture that followed. So tonight, look at your surname again. Write down the earliest ancestor you can prove. Find the county. Look for older spellings. Research the meaning, but don't stop there. Ask whether the historical meaning actually matches the geography of your family. And if your surname was mentioned in this video, tell us in the comments where your family comes from and how far back you've managed to trace the name. If it wasn't mentioned, leave it below as well, because it may lead us into our next investigation. Subscribe to Unknown Discoveries for more journeys into the names, migrations, and forgotten histories that connect ordinary families with an extraordinary past. Because your surname alone cannot prove that your ancestors stood in an Anglo-Saxon village before the Norman Conquest. But it can give you something almost as exciting, a clue. And sometimes one clue is all you need to begin uncovering 1,000 years of family history.